is brought to you by Head Start Basketball.
There's one tag game I played sometimes. There's two players, let's say, inside the circle at the half-court line. They don't have a ball, and you have 30 seconds to try to tag each other's feet as much as possible. So you're just tagging the feet of the other person with your own feet. And every time you tag the feet of the other guy, you get 1 point.
Jonas De Bruyne was most recently a player development coach with Urspring Basketball Academy in Germany. He is a licensed basketball B trainer who previously worked for Elite Academy in Belgium. Jonas shares his insight on how he uses the constraints-led approach and differentiated learning in his coaching. You'll want to have a notebook handy as you listen to this episode with Jonas De Bruyne, international basketball coach. Coach, do you have an old shooting machine sitting in your storage closet right now? If you do, our friends at Dr. Dish Basketball can help. Trade in your machine, any make or model, in any condition, even if it's a competitor's model, and get $4,000 off the Dr. Dish CT Plus, equipped with advanced stat tracking, competition-based training capabilities, and the industry's largest touchscreen. Learn more at drdishbasketball.com and follow their incredible content at Dr. Dish B-Ball on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. Mention the Hoopheads podcast and save an extra $300 on the Dr. Dish Rebel, All-Star, and CT models. Those are some great deals, Hoopheads. Get your Dr. Dish shooting machine today.
Hi, this is Danny Young, the head boys coach at Shaker Heights High School, and you're listening to Hoopheads Podcast.
Prepare like the pros with the all-new Fast Draw and Fast Scout. Fast Draw has been the #1 play diagramming software for coaches for years. You'll quickly see why Fast Model Sports has the most compelling and intuitive basketball software out there. For a limited time, Fast Model is offering Hoopheads listeners 15% off Fast Draw and Fast Scout. Just use the code HHP15 at checkout to grab your discount, and you'll be on your way to more efficient game prep and improved communication with your team. Fast Model also has new coaching content every week on its blog, plus play and drill diagrams on its Playbank. Check out the links in the show notes for more. Fast Model Sports is the best in basketball. You'll want to have a notebook handy as you listen to this episode with Jonas De Bruyne, international basketball coach. Hello and welcome to the Hoopheads podcast. It's Mike Klinzing here this afternoon without my co-host Jason Sunkel, but I am pleased to be joined by Jonas De Bruyne, international basketball coach. Jonas, welcome.
Hi, Mike. I'm happy to be here. Good that we found the time.
Thrilled to have you on. It's going to be a lot of fun. Looking forward to diving in and talking some hoops with you. Let's start by going back in time to when you were a kid. Tell me a little bit about some of your first experiences with the game of basketball.
Cool. So until I was 6 years old, I played a little bit of everything. I did a lot of like movement stuff, like I did a little bit of gymnastics, some swimming, but I really didn't like something specifically. But then I rolled a little bit into athletics, so track and field for you guys. That's what I was been doing until I was 10. And then I got a little bit tired of that. And then my mom actually, she brought me to a basketball practice because that's what she did when she was younger. She was a basketball coach. I was doubting between basketball and soccer because I also like that a lot. But I did my first basketball practice when I was 10, I think, or 11. And then I just stayed in basketball in my local basketball club. So that's a little bit how I rolled into basketball. Then I played until I was, I think, 22 or 23. Not at a high level, like the fourth or fifth level in Belgium, like a men's team. But I was injured badly twice on my left ankle. Didn't got in the team anymore. But I was already coaching from when I was 17, I think. Like always lower age groups, like under 12s, under 10s. And then from when I stopped playing basketball, the coaching became a little bit more competitive, I would say, or like a little bit more serious. I was doing CrossFit and a lot of running next to that. So that's where I kept my conditioning up, I would say. And then when I was, I think, 24, 25, I changed clubs. So I was always coaching with my local club. So it's called Basics Melshille. And when I was 25, I wanted to do a little bit more serious. So then I went to Elite Academy. 4 years I was coaching there. There I was working with Jurik Michiels. He's the leader of the academy. Really good guy. I know him from my bachelor degree. I did sports with him. So that's how I got with him. That's also where I met Alex Rama in the second or the third year. And then I kept coaching in the Elite Academy for 4 years. And after that, so that's 2 years ago, Alex called me to come over to Italy because he had a coaching opportunity there. So I was there for 1 year. Then the club didn't exist anymore, so I had to find another job. And that's how I ended up here in Germany with Urspring Basketball Academy, where now the season is just done. So that's a little bit, in short, my story on how I got here in Germany as a Belgian guy, I would say.
All right, let's work backwards. Tell me about your experience as a player and the coaches that worked with you and how their approach might be different from how you approach your players as a coach.
From what I can still remember, I had a lot of different kind of coaches. For when I start basketball, it was more about fun. So it was a woman, I forgot her name, but she always played with my mom. And then like I was there for 1 year doing like the static ball handling stuff and the layups and how to teach a layup and the passing with two hands just to each other, like the stuff everyone did or still does, I think. And then I got a few weird coaches, I would say, maybe because my level was not that high. But there was one coach who was always yelling next to the sideline. It was weird. Like his practices were also really structured, really a lot of discipline. You had to shut up during the practice, just listen to him. It wasn't a lot of fun because that was a year like I actually wanted to quit, but that it was not the only one. There were a lot of players in that team. So then the management changed that coach. He was only there for 1 year, which was good, I think, because he was not a really nice guy, not a nice person. And then I had a few good coaches. Jonas De Bruyne, he was my coach for 3 years, I think. He did some local regional teams also, so it was a pretty good level back then. That's already more than 10 years ago, I think. And then Jules Mere, also a guy that knows a lot tactical wise, but is a little bit different than the approach I use now. Obviously, when I started coaching and I was doing the local local teams in my old club, I was using a lot of them, stuff of them, like with tennis balls. I mean, I'm not saying that it's bad, but the transition to a real basketball game is still different because I knew I was practicing with my under 14s there the last year before I went to Elite Academy. So that's 6 or 7 years ago, and then we're doing tennis ball drills every practice, doing some read and react, 2-on-0, 3-on-0, and I was wondering like why they we do this every practice, and at the game they don't do it. Like, why is this a problem? And then I went to Elite Academy, and there Jurik was also really nice and modern in his approach. And then I met Alex, and then it made sense why it wasn't transitioning. So that's also why I stayed with Elite Academy. They're also really invest in coaches development. That for me, that's really important. That's also why I left Belgium. I went to Italy last year. So yeah, that's a little bit my approach I had when I was younger. Yeah.
Okay, so when you get those first couple opportunities to coach the younger teams, before you kind of know what you're doing and you're just still sort of copying the coaches that had coached you and using methodologies that now you're looking at them going, I'm not sure how effective those are.
Mm-hmm.
There still had to be some part of you that really liked coaching, obviously, because here you are, you're still coaching. So what do you remember about those first experiences that you really enjoyed that made you think, hey, this is something that I want to do for a career? Think back to that time.
Yeah, I think I I think I started at 17, and I really at a young age, I really figured out that I wanted to do something with sports and young people, and that's also why I started studying for a sport teacher. So after my secondary school, so when I was 17, 18, I did that for 4 years, a year longer, because it was so interesting. I know I just had some troubles. But that's also why I figured out I wanted to do something with sports and movement. So it kept me triggering, and it's also like that's also where I discovered that I want to keep improving myself to be the best movement coach then, because sport teaching is general movement that I can be. And that's also why I already, like the last year was as a primary school teacher, I was also experimenting a lot already with the CLA, but with different sports then. And I still know that I was trying some stuff with volleyball, and I mean, the plans I needed to follow in sport teaching in Belgium are pretty broad. They need to get some certain stuff, but how you come to that is like pretty open. So they have some practice plans, I would say, but yeah, I know like, okay, I need to teach volleyball, and it's first grade. Okay, I know they can this and this. Okay, let's just try. And it was like a little bit sometimes. It's like now too, like you try something and sometimes it's working and sometimes it's not working. And during that time, a lot of stuff was not working. But yeah, I also wanted to give myself the chance to really try it, because I thought it was interesting for myself, but also for the students I had, because they had a lot more fun. They were all right in their eyes. We're always playing games, which is which is true until a certain level. But yeah, there's also something behind it. But with basketball, it's a lot more easier, because yeah, I like basketball a lot more, so it's easier to get into something if you're really interested in it. I mean, I also like volleyball, and also like soccer, and I also like gymnastics, but that's still different than basketball, in my opinion, for myself. So,
When did you first come across the constraints-led approach, and how did you start to look at it and incorporate it to start to use it with the players that you were coaching? Was that something that you came across by looking at video? Was that something that somebody showed you in person? Was it when you went and worked with Alex, or when you worked with Yurik? How did you come across it at first? And then how did you start to take those first steps toward using it with your players?
I think in my when Alex visited Elite Academy, so that was in the second year, I think, when I was there. I really saw that it was doing something different. I mean, we were at Elite Academy. We were still doing. They were still doing something between games approach and CLA. It's sometimes a weird mix, I think. They still do some on-air stuff and working about the details. Like, you can discuss if it's for some players it may be valuable or maybe not, but that's, in my opinion, what they do now. So I was also doing a mix between on-air working detail stuff and games approach in my first year. But when Alex came in, it started to change a little bit. And then I would say in the third year, so when Alex left, I really started to experiment with that myself. But I only had 2 practices during that time, because it was right after Corona, and I had a little bit of a tough time myself. But I still remember that I did like some differential learning shooting with players for the first time, which was also weird for me, but also for the players, because they never did it. They were under 18 and under 21, so it's not that they don't think about what they are doing or what I say. If it would be smaller guys, they don't really care; they just do it. But for me, it was also a bit of a tough time, because I didn't felt like I already knew enough for that to really explain it to them. But I was already experimenting with it. Also, from the moment I went to Elite Academy, I had my 15 minutes of every day that I invested in myself to learn something new. We call it the Kaizen mindset. It's from Elite Academy. We use it a lot, and they're using it a lot. And it means like getting 1% better every day. So that's what I try to do, like 15 minutes of learning for myself. And that's how I got a little bit more into detail about the CLA and ecological dynamics. So I would say my third year was starting to experiment a lot with it. And then in my fourth year, I really went fully in on it. And yeah, I'm still. So I really like it. It's really open. You can try a lot. The players like it. So in my opinion, it doesn't have any non-benefits, I would say. So for me, I really like it. The players like it. So why wouldn't I keep doing it? Yeah.
Let's start with the player piece of it, and then we'll go into sort of from the coaching side of it. From a player perspective, why do you think players like to be in the type of environment where their practice is primarily based around CLA?
I think the younger guys they like it because they just see it as playing, and that's what if you have young students or young people that like to move, who doesn't like to play a tag game or who doesn't like to play a finishing game with rock paper scissors, or who doesn't like to score, be the first one to score first. That's a little bit. I think if you have a little bit of a sportive outcome, because that's also like this last 2 weeks here, I also did a little bit of a sport teaching job here because someone was at home because he had a child here, and there I really saw like why I stopped teaching sport to 17 to 18 year olds, because that's totally different. They were sports classes, but also classes of like girls that, oh no, my nails, or I'm gonna sweat, I'm
Right.
gonna run.
Yes.
So that was a really big challenge. But even with them, I tried to do a good job and let them have fun. In their eyes, it was a little bit weird, I think, because I was only there for 2 weeks, so I only had them 3 or 4 times. But the teacher that is a normal is really classical and traditional in his approach. So that was a really big difference, especially to them because they were the oldest, so they're 17 to 18 years old. So that was a little bit of a tough time also for me because I saw they were not enjoying it, and they're also not getting it. Like you need to do. I was teaching them a layup, for example. It was also basketball. They didn't have it this year yet. The teacher told me, so I did basketball with them, and I teach them a layup. But it was already with the defender in front of them, so they had to give a handoff and then do 2 steps. It worked. I mean, there were some guys doing a layup without they know they were doing a layup, but other ones they were not sportive at all or not really athletic. For them, it was tougher. And I tried to explain to them that that's not how we learn. Like on air stuff, why would you do a layup if there's no one in front of you, or why would you do going that side if there's no one that takes away your straight line, for example? That was a little bit tougher, but I do think it's doable. Like if you simplify the task a lot of the small sided game or the activity you do, I think it's doable. Yeah.
Would you say to a coach if you were having a conversation with someone who is still using some of the older coaching methodologies, whether that's on air or stationary ball handling, that kind of thing? What would you say to a coach to help them to understand the benefits of CLA and what them and their players will get out of it?
I think that's a little bit of a tough time because it's also what I had here in Germany, actually, a little bit. The thing is, I think it's easier if you have a program that is not really competitive. So, if, for example, here, I'm just going to give an example. The under 19s, last year they had the top 4 here in Germany, which is really good. And this year they just missed it. So they came in like 6th or 7th out of the whole Germany. So they have results with the under 19. So then it's for me tougher to prove them wrong a little bit, because they have results with the stuff they're already doing. But I think if you start a team from scratch, it's easier to get into the coach, if that makes sense, because they don't have any results. That's the first thing, I think. The second thing also is I'm not arguing with the coaches anymore. I mean, it's like if you go on Twitter or you post something on transformation in basketball, for example, you see all the replies, and I'm not reading that anymore. In the beginning, I did it a few times, but You always lose on social media. So what I would try to do with a new coach is I would try to explain how I work and why I think I do what I do, and then just try to get a little bit, give them options. Like, for example, okay, what do you do for a warm up? Okay, I do dynamic stretches. Okay, then let's try, instead of the dynamic stretches, with under 12, for example, try to the tag game, and let's see if you like it or not. And try to implement, like, not the whole practice, but maybe one thing. Or, okay, you do on-air layups. Okay, instead of the on-air layups, as a coach, just stand in front and see what happens. Just try to give them, like, really little ideas or little tweaks that they maybe can change. That's also what I did a little bit here. To the under 14 coach, and there were also some under 12 coaches here. We had a cooperation with 2 other teams. So there was Urspring and then Surflingen and Ehingen. And I went also to practices of the under 12 and under 14 in Ehingen. And I just gave them options and tried to give them a little bit feedback. And now it's really cool to see that they start to implement some stuff, like a little bit more time on task. That was a little bit the biggest mistake they made here. They have a lot of big groups, not a lot of gyms here. So they were the under 12s, for example, they were with more than 20 players. And he, for example, only had like one ball for a warm-up game. Yeah, okay, maybe instead of doing one ball, okay, then I gave him, maybe try to with 2 balls. And then he tried it with 2 balls and it's working out. Okay, next time maybe 3 or 4. It's like, yeah, some small tweaks like that, I think could help a big time. And then also, like, the under 16, I think there's also a difference between some coaches, because under 12 coach just liked it when I was there and just gave them feedback on the fly, which really worked well for him and for me. I really liked it. Instead of me saying to the players what they need to do, I was running the practice behind the scenes a little bit. So if I saw something like, okay, they're only finishing with the right hand, maybe I told to the coach, maybe give them double points for a left hand finish. If I saw they were not attacking the straight line out of a finish, okay, now you get double points if you can only finish with one dribble. Stuff like that. And that worked really well for him. And then the other coach, he was a little bit more, I wouldn't say he was impressed by my practice, but there was one time he was not feeling really well. And I told him, like, should I run the practice? Because I was there anyway. I did the practice. And for him, that was really nice to see how I worked with his players. He just gave me a topic. Okay, I want to teach pick and roll on the side. How would you do it? And then I just did my stuff. I think how I should teach it to them. And it gave him some ideas on where he can already build on. So I think, yeah, one, don't argue with him. Just maybe give him some options. So small things. And then 2, also really invest your time as a coach to help other coaches out, like go to their practices, because a lot of clubs are like doing clinics one time during every 3 months or something like that. But if you want to really impact someone, it's the same with players. If they only practice one time every 3 months, they're not going to improve. So I really try to invest some time, although it was not my job actually here. To go to the practices of them. They were interested. They also came to my practices with the play development here, and I could learn from them and they can learn from me. I liked it to spread the word a little bit.
What do you see as being the biggest improvement that you've seen in the players that you've worked with compared to a player who maybe plays for a coach that uses more traditional methods, or players that previously played for you that use more traditional methods? In other words, what's the biggest benefit of using the CLA, using differentiated learning? What do you see in your players? Is the learning faster? Is it that it's more fun? Is it that it transfers more quickly? Just what do you see as being the main benefit to the players when you utilize some of the things that you've been talking about?
I also think that if you have an environment where they do a mix like they did here in Urspring, for me it's tougher to get through them. One, because some guys, for example, the pro team here, they're playing the 3rd level, and I only had them once every week. and there was 60 minutes. And yeah, I didn't went fully CLA on them because they need to perform and they don't always feel comfortable with the stuff that I'm doing. So I got a rule like the first 20 minutes is for them. So we do whatever they want to do. So some guys were doing DL shooting with me and the other guys were just doing spot shooting or doing dynamic stretches, whatever they wanted to do. And then the next 40, that was more 30 minutes, was then for me, I would say. So with them, I didn't feel I had a really big impact because, I mean, if you have 2 play development sessions and 5 team practices a week, and you only have 1 play development session where you do 30 minutes of small-sided games, and the way I think basketball should be played, I don't think I have a really big impact. But there were guys, especially the under 17s here, because there's a big gap. They play under 16 and then they immediately go to under 19. So the under 17s, they had a lot more practice time with me because they don't play a lot in the weekend because there's a lot 3 years older other guys that are playing. So but with them, I sometimes had them like 3 or even 4 times a week. And I think the biggest difference between them and other players we were playing against was just their base. What I mean by that is you have a specific role most of the time when you're under 19 here. So you're, for example, a guard and you're passing first. You're, for example, a big who is a pick and roll player. But the guys I had in my play development sessions, I think they were pretty, or they got more, how do you say it, positionless. They got more broader, like I don't know what the right word for it is, but there was one guy, for example, who was a really good shooter, but now he got also really good at finishing close to the rim. He got really good in making using his body a lot more on the drive. There was one guy, for example, who had a really good finish inside the paint, but his catch and shoot 3 from the corner was already getting really solid now. So I would say they are a little bit more like fuller, like more holistic players, if that makes sense. From what I see, maybe someone else has another opinion about that. I also think they were a lot better movers. I also did a lot of tag games for warm up. I did a lot of movement games, like just also stuff that I stole from from Olivier Goodluck. He's like, they use like fighting monkey stuff with tennis balls and stuff like that. It's a little bit weird, but they just get better movers by doing that. And I think that's the biggest difference you saw, for example, with the guys I had a little bit more, and then, for example, compared to the pro players who only had 30 minutes.
So I know we're on audio, but can you explain maybe a tagging game that you play for a warm-up for a coach that's out there listening? Is there a simple one that you like that you can describe with words and not have to draw it out or have somebody see video? Is that something you could share?
Yeah, sure. There's one tag game I played sometimes. There's 2 players, let's say, inside the circle at the half court line. They don't have a ball, and you have 30 seconds to try to tag each other's feet as much as possible. So you're just tagging the feet of the other person with your own feet. And every time you tag the feet of the other guy, you get 1 point. So that we play for 30 seconds. So they're like a little bit more like a boxer, I would say. So light on their feet. Mm-hmm. That's one I did a lot. Then with the ball, just the same thing. Then I had like, you can do every second dribble, you need to do a change of direction. There are like endless constraints with that. Like if you see they're not moving a lot, you can do, for example, say, okay, after every tag, you go, need to tag the circle on another quarter of the circle. So they move a little bit more. If you see they're only using their right hand, you say, yeah, you can only use your left hand. It really depends. It's also a little bit more what I learned here and also last year in college is like I had some stuff I wanted to do. So I know before the practice I'm doing the warm-up. That's a topic of the play development session. But how I get there is not really certain yet. So I know I do, for example, the tag game that I just explained, but I don't know what they will do or don't do. So depending on what they do or don't do, I'll give the constraints. And yeah, that's also something I needed to learn a little bit, because I was pretty attached to my paper, I would say, before,
Uh-huh.
especially when I was a younger coach at Malsil, and then the first 2 years at the academy also. But then after that, it got a bit better, because they also at under 14 they had school, and I saw they were sometimes mad and were not working really well. But last year at prep, I really learned by just observing, and yeah, it's also a bit of that approach, observing the players and then give them constraints. During the practice, like nothing prepared.
So it's a combination of preparing before the practice, so knowing, hey, I'm going to do this tagging game,
Mm-hmm.
and then after you're doing that prep work, which obviously you want to come in prepared and knowing that, hey, I want to do this, I want to do that, but not knowing exactly what it's going to look like. And then as a coach, making observations about what the players are actually
Yeah,
doing within the environment that you've created. And then based on what the players are doing, then you make changes and put in constraints or give them guidance as far
yeah,
as, okay, this is what you need to do based on what you're seeing. Is that an accurate description of what you're talking
yeah.
about?
Agree. And then with for example, new players, it's a little bit more, or like the students I had, for example, like last week. So they're not really athletic, not really sportive. It's maybe also showing them what the solutions are. And with the players I had, they were obviously good movers and used to playing basketball. I was a little bit more tweaking, and then try to get out of them without me telling them what I want to get out of them, if that makes sense.
No, it does. All right, coaches, listen up. It's time to kick this season up a notch and give your team the competitive edge they deserve with Game Changer. Game Changer is the ultimate tool for coaches, with features designed to help take your team to the next level. It's time to take this season to new heights. Download Game Changer for free on iOS or Android to start getting valuable stats and video your team can build on. Get the ultimate coaches tool today by downloading Game Changer. Game Changer. Stream, score, connect. Learn more at gc.com/hoopheads. That's gc.com/hoopheads. I think one of the things that I find to be super interesting about CLA and just how you go about approaching it is when you have players out on the court and you're not, the old traditional way is you tell the player, hey, this is what we want you to do. And the coach is stopping play and saying, hey, you should have done this, or this is what should have happened. And with CLA, it's much more of a case of you're putting those obstacles, those constraints in the player's path. And then the player has to figure out what is the solution. So instead of the coach coming up with the solution, the coach is providing the problem and the player is providing the solution, which in many cases, you think about traditional coaching, it's almost the opposite, where what the player is doing is the
Yeah.
problem and the coach is providing the solution. And,
Yeah.
and what I like about CLA is it's the opposite. And that requires you as a coach, as I said before, to prep and then also to be aware of what's going on while your kids are practicing, which sometimes, coaches, as you said, you kind of get married to your practice plan and you're like, okay, this is what we're doing. And you don't necessarily look and say, well, this is what we're supposed to be working on, but what I'm actually seeing is something different. So I think that's kind of what you're explaining.
I want to build a bit on that, Mike, if that's okay.
Okay.
What I
Sure.
really recognized also, like last year, was we only had 2 practices a day max at prep. Like in the morning, it was play development, and in the evening, we had a team practice. But even though it were only 2 practices, so let's say in the morning it was an hour, and in the evening it was 1.5 to 2 hours. It's, let's say, 3 hours of 2.5 to 3 hours of practice time. Like, you're really tired because of that, because that's really the difference, or where the thing is, like, you need to be really present and observe, and you're explaining, but then you need to be a lot more inside the practice. It's not like you're doing this for 10 minutes. Okay, they're done doing their layup lines. We go to the next one and explain it, and then done again. It's like it's a little bit more. I wouldn't say it's intensive, but for your mental state, compared to the years I teached the practice at Elite Academy or at Malsil, there was a really big difference. I don't get really like how you can coach. For example, I talked with a coach a few weeks ago, and he told me if I would come. I'm still searching for a new coaching opportunity, but that's something else. But I talked with a coach, and he told me that I should coach 5 teams, and like I don't really get how you can coach 5 teams, even though it's maybe like only it's. I mean, if I did it also sometimes here, play development, it was only like 45 minutes to 1 hour. And on Tuesdays and Wednesdays were the most, because then were the most players were free, because it was based on their school schedule. So it was like, I think I had a maximum of 5 hours of coaching. And after that day, I'm really dead. Like you don't need to talk to me in the evening anymore, because it's like, not today. But also sometimes I only had 1 or 2, and I just recognize that you're more present and more into the practice. Like, I wouldn't say my practices of those 5 hours a day were bad or something, but it's still different. Also, for example, when you coach a game, like now are the European Championships also here. So the under 20 girls are already from Belgium already playing. So I watch some games of them. And when you watch coaches on that platform, they also have a totally different approach. Like they yell, they really have a lot of body language. But it's also a bit quite opposite to what I'm doing. I'm more observing, and I think I'm more calm. I'm not saying that you can't be energetic, or that the players sometimes don't need to be straight to the point or something like that. But it's a little bit of a different approach also into coaching, because you teach the players into practice what they need to do on game days. And you're not like a PlayStation coach or something. You're not playing a game on a TV. The players should make their own decisions, and that's also what they should do on game days. So that's a little bit also different than the traditional coaches. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's where you get back to what's the major benefit. And the major benefit is that what you're doing in practice looks very, very similar to what players are going to have to do in a game. You don't get many breakaway layups where it's 1-on-0. That doesn't happen very often in a game, but there are a lot of times where you might beat your defender, and then there's a help defender, and now you got to make a read or a decision. You got to figure out, how do I finish around this help defender, or do I have to kick to one of my teammates, or whatever it may be. And so I think that goes back to what we just talked about in terms of practice, right? The game is the situation that the coach has prepped the players for through the things that they're doing in their practices. And so I really, when I hear you talking about the transference of learning and just putting the players in an environment where it's more similar to what they're going to see in an actual game, that's where I picture, again, somebody who uses this approach, as you just described, being on the sideline, being calm, making observations the same way you would do in a practice setting, rather than someone stomping up and down the sideline, yelling and trying to get their players to listen to them in the midst of a game, which we all know,
Not really.
anybody who's played the game or coached the game, the chances of your instruction getting to that player in time for them to process it and act on it in a game, the percentage of that is really, really low, I would say.
Yeah. Agree.
It's that's a tough one. And then the other thing that I found interesting that you said was, when you talk about coaching 5 teams, and I never coached 5 teams, but before I started the podcast, I was doing a decent amount of training, and there would be times where in one night I might have 4 or 5 1-hour training sessions with a player. And I know by the time I got to that 4th or 5th player, I was not nearly as fresh and observant as I was in the first 1, 2, or 3 hours of that particular training session. So I had to be really careful and make sure and be intentional before I started that 4th or 5th hour of, hey, I got to really make sure that I'm doing what I'm supposed to do, because it was real easy to be mentally tired as a coach when you're going through and trying to work that many hours. And again, when you're talking about having 5 teams, mean, that's a lot of players that you're having to sort of process what their strengths and weaknesses are and how you can help them.
I think that's just honestly a little bit crazy. I mean, I can do that, but I don't think I can do it in a way that the players got something out of it and that I can get something out of it. I mean, I'd rather do maybe 2 teams like really decently, get to know the players, get to build the relationships, get them play development plans, give them maybe a strength and conditioning program or whatever, than having 5 teams that play 5 games a week and then going from the one game to another. I mean, that's also a little bit the way coaches or teams work, I guess. Maybe a little bit for the money also financially, because coaches need to be paid. But yeah, I don't think you can be, like you just said, be present in all the practices. Or it's the same with the players. I mean, if you put if they have a whole day school, for example, I also saw it this year with the play development. It was sometimes during school. And you also recognize it with the players. I mean, if they just sat 8 hours on a bench listening to a teacher, and then immediately after that they have play development with me 45 minutes, and they need to go again, like being really present and pay attention and be careful that they don't get hit on their toes, for example. It's tough, but for the coaches, it's just the same thing. I was lucky a little bit here. I think the maximum I had was only 2 play development sessions behind each other, so there was 2 hours and then a break, which was okay. But I think if you have 3 hours or 4 hours after each other, I'm not saying it's undoable, but it's not ideal to perform your best, I think.
Yeah, I agree with you 100% there. I think it's tough to go back to back to back to back to back and really be as on point and having as much attention to detail as you probably need to be able to do the best job that you can for your players. Can you talk a little bit about differentiated learning when it comes to shooting? Because I think it's a concept that not that many coaches out there really have, even to be honest, heard of it, Jonas. And
Sure.
I think that if you can kind of shed some light on what it means, what the theory is behind it, and then how you kind of put it into practice.
Okay. So the simplest way I can try to explain it, what I also tell the players sometimes, if in their eyes they're doing weird stuff. So I always tell them, like, if you can shoot it in a bad way, really good. So if the ball goes in a bad way, then you can also shoot it in a good way, really good. So, for example, if I tell them to put their feet close to each other, and then normal and then wide, I tell them, if you can shoot it with your both feet together, like imagine how you can shoot the ball when you're really in balance. That's how I explain it to the players a little bit. How I would explain it to coaches is a little bit different. I would say, in difficult words, it's actually just opening degrees of freedom. So what I mean by that is by making them better movers, and just give them a lot of movements that they can practice, is that if they will figure out their own solutions and get to a better way. So, for example, if I have a player this year who was really shooting flat, there was a player here in Oostspring, I would not say, for example, put your hand there and shoot it more from your legs, so you get more stronger upwards rotation of the ball, for example. But I would just try to give him constraints in a way he needs to shoot the ball higher. So obviously the most helpful constraint is then like shooting for brads or swishes. Like a brad is back rim and down, so the ball goes into the rim, touches the backside, and then it spins back to you on the same line. And a swish is obviously just a swish. That's the number one constraint I would give to players, because then they need to have a high arc, because if they don't get a high arc, they don't get the brad or the swish. And then another one gave them, for example, to him is to just give them 3 options. Give him 3 options, like 1, you're shooting flat, so below the backboard. 2, the second shot you take is as high as the backboard. And then 3, you shoot it higher as the backboard. So just to try to give them options, and then in the hope that they will self-regulate and see themselves like, oh, if I shoot it higher than the backboard, I got more chance for a bread or a swish. That's a little bit how I would explain it to a coach. So instead of really giving them details about how to shoot, I would just try to give them a constraint or an option where they doing something that I want them to do without me saying them to do it, if that makes sense.
No, it does. And I was looking kind of in preparation for our talk, I was looking at some of the stuff that you have on Twitter and on Instagram and that you've used with players in the past. And one thing that caught my eye was you had a player that was working on, I'm assuming, trying to get arc on their shot, that was shooting from the baseline and trying to shoot the ball over the corner of the backboard, which when you think about it, you're like, okay, well, that kid's probably never going to take that shot in a game. So the traditionalist in me would say, why are we practicing shots that we're never going to take in a game? And yet, just based on what you said a moment ago, it makes complete sense, right? Like you didn't then, when you're having the player shoot from the deep corner, from on the baseline and shoot over the backboard, you're not telling them, hey, put your hand here, or you've got to do this in order to be able to have the shot to go in. What they have to figure out, how do I get the ball over the backboard and still get it in the basket? And I thought that was a super interesting approach. Now, part of me wonders, how many times do they have to do that in order to have that sort of to have them incorporate that into their shot? And so that's what I wonder about, is when you're working with a player and you're doing some of the differentiated learning, and you're putting them in these different spots where they're trying to start to solve for themselves, how long have you found it to take for them to do some of these different things to get them so that when they're actually shooting in a game, that they've incorporated some of the things that they've learned? Because I totally understand the concept. I guess my question is, what's the timeline for the benefit to start to show up, if that question makes sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. I think that's a little bit a tough thing to say because everyone learns at different rates.
Sure.
So what I try to do is, for example, with that player, I think I know which player it was. For him, it was really frustrating because I literally told him to shoot 60 seconds from behind the backboard. So obviously he maybe only made one or two, but it's really frustrating. So with the DL shooting, I think with also the new guys I had this year, with the under 14s from this year, I think I did it like maximum 6 to 8 minutes. So I did always 1 minute. I rebound, the other guy shoots, and then after 1 minute we change. So I think I did 3 or 4 rounds of that. So I'm not doing it a lot because I sometimes get really frustrated by that, because the goal is not to make the basket, but to shake up their movement solutions and make them better movers, if that makes sense. But with him, the time span, it's tough to say. There is a guy who I had a lot, and just February, March, he was really shooting well. But then the play development sessions, I'm not saying it's because of the play development sessions, but the load here went down because it was end of the season. So April and May, he had a really bit of a shooting slump, I would say. Yeah, it's tough to say. It sometimes goes up, sometimes goes down. There was a guy who was shooting pretty consistently the whole year through, and he was having me a lot, I would say. So it's tough to say. I can't really put a time span on that. I just know with some players it takes not a lot of time. With other players it takes really long time, and with some players even maybe it never changes. I think it really depends on the individual. But yeah, that's also not my job. I think my job is to just help them the way I can help them in as many ways as possible, and just try to do my best and doing the team practices and doing the play development sessions. And if they get it, they get it, and if not, also fine. I mean, I'm not going to be mad because the guy is not shooting with a high arc and a catch and shoot three into the game. I will still give him feedback or stuff like that, or help him based on his play development plan, but I would never be mad or like he's not doing what I want him to do. Or no, yeah, it's tough to put a really time limit or period on that, I think.
searching for solutions, right? So you as the coach and the player are working together to search for a solution. If arc is the issue, then you're trying to figure out, hey, what are some ways that we can help this player to improve their arc? And obviously, if they improve their arc, we're going to expect that eventually they're going to become a better shooter. But to your point, sometimes it takes a lot longer than I'm sure players would would like for it
Yeah.
to would like for it to take. I know that like I've worked with my son who has a pretty flat shot and kind of shoots the ball behind his head. And at one point, he and I worked for probably like 6 weeks. And I guess I probably at the time I hadn't even heard, this is probably, I don't know, 2.5 years ago maybe, and hadn't heard of differentiated learning, and probably would have been something good to try with him
Yeah.
back then. But we worked for like 6 weeks trying just different things, and I was trying to get him to move, and we did some different sort of actions to load his shot in a different way, and it just never took. Like we
Yeah.
worked on it, and he would always eventually just kind of revert back to the way he was shooting. And eventually I'm like, we're just kind of spinning our wheels here and not getting anywhere. And we eventually just decided, hey man, you got to just double down on on what you do. And like you said, sometimes you can be a good shooter shooting the ball badly.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what we decided, is like, you have to get good at this motion, even though I don't know that it's the most efficient or the best motion, but it's what we have to work with. And so let's try to do that. And that's kind of what we've done. But I think it is for a player who, like my son, who just kind of was locked into a certain way of shooting that probably isn't optimal. This to me seems like it could be an interesting way to at least potentially break that cycle and allow him to get closer to what an ideal shooting form might be.
Also, is he like a good shooter now, or?
He's pretty good from, I'd say, 12 to 17 feet.
Okay.
So he's pretty good mid-range shooter, but threes, he's just really flat, and it ends up being
Yeah.
much more of a, like, it's back, and it's much more of a, it's more of a slingshot.
Okay.
So,
Yeah.
but it's just interesting because, again,
Yeah.
you try different things. So
For him, it's maybe a
you
functional movement solution until he's like this year. I also had a player, a special guy. He shoots his mid range with his right hand, and from the moment he goes behind the triple line, he shoots with his left hand.
wow.
So
See,
that's
okay, I have a question. I have a question for you.
yeah.
Like, so growing up, I'm a lot older than you. So I'm 54. But when I was a kid, I
You're
don't
not a lot
remember.
older. I'm 60.
I don't have. When I was a kid, I don't remember anybody who had like did one thing like that with their right hand and something else with their left hand, and they did this like, and their hands. You were either right-handed or you
Yeah.
were left-handed. That's just the way I remember. And then so my son, for one of my kids, obviously he shoots baskets with he shoots with his right hand.
Mm-hmm.
Everything that, basketball, he plays right-handed, but he writes with his left hand. He eats with his left hand.
Yeah.
So he's just, every different activity is, he does one thing with the other. Then I have a daughter who, she's 14, going to be 15 here shortly. She shoots the ball, jump shots, with her left hand. So she
Okay.
shoots threes. All her jump shots are left-handed, but she's a much better dribbler with her right hand, and her right-handed layups are way better than her left hand. And I'm always, I look at my kids and I'm like, I don't even understand how that is even physiologically possible.
Yeah.
Like it just makes no sense to me. It's so interesting.
With that guy, it's the same thing. I once looked it up because I wanted to know, and apparently it's something in the brain, like the left or right, that there's some connection that is different than in ours. Or maybe it's not different because for them it makes sense, but it's just different than in, for example, my brain, because I do everything with my right hand. It's pretty interesting, like you said, indeed. It's cool.
Yeah, when you start really thinking about, again, and you mentioned earlier, just trying to take 15 minutes a day to improve yourself and learn and try to figure stuff out. Like that stuff to me is super interesting, of the sort of the why behind it. And then if you can take those whys and try to apply them in the coaching realm, that's really then where you start to get things. And I know that one of the things that when you think about coaching, right, it's always, you're looking for, well, who's somebody that is doing some of the things that I believe in, that I've seen, and then you take and copy those, and then you are able to tweak them and make them work better or use them that they fit better to your style. So the question that I have for you is, when you're thinking about CLA and differentiated learning and putting together stuff, are you better at being on the basketball court, figuring out a drill or figuring out a constraint in the moment, or are you better sitting down with a pen and paper or at the computer and kind of thinking it out beforehand? Because for me, I know I'm much better when I'm on the court and you give me like 4 players and say, hey, put together a drill that works on da, 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 da.
Yeah.
And usually I can figure that out while I'm standing on the court. But if you said, hey, sit down with this piece of paper and pencil and try to draw out what a drill might look like or conceptually create a drill, I'm not nearly as good. So I don't know if either of those approaches is similar to what you do or how you think about that.
I think if it's not this year, I worked more as a play development coach, and last year was a bit of a mix. But if you say just now to me, like, those are 4 players, design a drill on paper or on the court, I can do it both if it's more play development related, I think. But I think the most progress I can still make is as a head coach. This year, I had with Joe as the head coach here of the Pro B. We had in the beginning of the year, we had a rule every time we saw each other. I would give him a small sided game, and he would take notes on his computer, and then he would give me some kind of situation, and I would need to draw it up on the board. So, for example, okay, you're 2 points behind. You have those set up from players. You needed 60 seconds, bam. And he was timing it, and I was drawing it up. And that's something I really need to work on more on the tactical side of stuff, I would say, on literally the drawing, because if you don't practice that enough, that for me, that's the thing I would say. Also, during a team practice, I'm used to play development sessions, so it's a maximum of 6. So you can really clearly see, like, okay, those 2 guys are now working, so I focus on those 2 guys, and they're resting, so that's okay. But sometimes during a team practice, it's a little bit too chaotic. I wouldn't say it's too chaotic for me, but it's different. For me, I had a little bit of a tougher time to also see it on court now. Maybe it just come because last year I didn't have it because I still had the team practices. But this year I really recognized, like, if we're playing 5-on-5 and there's like 5 other or 6 other players next to the court waiting and they sub, I sometimes have a tough time to see the overview, if that makes sense.
No, it does.
Yeah, that's a little bit this thing I can make the most progress still on. But I think it will come back when I'm be a head coach and I have more team practices. That will come back, I think. But that's now a little bit for me I wouldn't say my weakness, but the stuff I can make the most progress in.
Yeah, those reps I think are really important. I always tell this story. I've told it a bunch of times on the podcast. My first practice ever when I was a head coach of a junior varsity high school team. So we're talking about 14 and 15-year-old kids. And this is back 30 some years ago. Mm-hmm. And I walked out into the practice and it was just me. I was the only coach. I didn't have any assistants. It was just me and 12 kids. And we started doing some stuff. And I just remember the first thought that came into my head, Jonas, was those kids are doing a million things wrong. And how am I ever going to fix all million of those things that they're doing wrong? And you very quickly, one of the things you realize very quickly as a coach is you're not going to quote fix all of the things that your players are doing wrong. And so I think if somebody would have probably explained to me CLA and differentiated learning in that moment, I probably would have gotten it immediately. It would have made complete sense because I would have been like, yeah, I can't, as a coach, I can't go out there and put this kid's foot here and this there and make sure that they're doing this and that. It's like you have to give them situations and then allow them to figure out those solutions. Because as a coach, I was looking around going, if I need solutions to all 500 of these mistakes that just happened in that first 5 minutes of the drill, there's no way I'm going to be able to do it.
It's crazy. No,
it's totally just, I mean, it's such a challenge. So let me ask you about that 15 minutes of learning that you do every day. What are the sources? Where do you go to? What's your process for trying to learn? Because I think that's one thing that coaches who are listening to a podcast like ours, they're trying to get better. They want to learn. They want to grow. They want to improve themselves. So what are some of the places that you like to go to try to improve yourself during that 15-minute learning time that you give yourself every day?
Now, for me, it's really important that I'm interested in everything. That's a little bit of I interested in everything about movement. So I get a stupid example. For example, I get a lot of emails from strength and conditioning coaches. Also, transformation basketball is there now. They have a newsletter, basketball immersion. I get a lot of emails from those, and I just save them, so they're just in my inbox. And when I don't have anything else to do, or I have not a really interesting podcast to listen to or to watch, then I just go through the emails and I take notes. So now I have like an activity book. So all my small set games are in there, and I have like it's like, I call it How to Teach Basketball, or like you can also call it the Basketball Bible, for example, or whatever. But if I see something that is interesting and I want to remember it, I just put it in there. So I have different how do you call it, modules, not, but like different parts, like for example shooting, finishing, but also tactical stuff like conceptual offense, CLA, but also like how to give feedback, how to learn, how to get a coaching job. So if I watch a podcast, or if I listen to some kind of podcast, or I read something, or I go to a live clinic, I just take the notes, or the notes that are most important for me, and I put them in there. So now this stuff, I started doing it when I started doing it at Elite Academy. So now it's been 5 or 6 years. And now I'm every summer I clean it up, I would say. And now I have 170 pages of like all basketball knowledge. And the activity book is now a little bit more than 100 small-sided games. So if you do, and at Elite Academy, I was still doing the full-time sport teaching job and then coaching. So I just only did 15 minutes. But from last year and this year, I just did it whenever I was free or whenever I was fresh. Like, for example, now I have vacation. So in the morning, the first 50 to 60 minutes, I always work on there. I call it work, but it's just literally watching a podcast or whatever, and then filling it in, the small sided games or the Bible, I would say. So that's a little bit how I keep it. And I'd also started small. The 15 minutes were not 15 minutes in the beginning. I started with 5 minutes because it's habits. I mean, it should be so small that you could do it every day. Because if you do it only once every 2 weeks, 30 minutes is not going to add up. But if you do, for example, 5 minutes every day of the week, then it's already 35. You already have more than you did in 1 week. So it should be so small that there's no limit or thing that holds you back. So I started with 5 minutes, and then it became 15 when I was still sport teaching. And then it became 30 minutes during Corona, and then it became 2 hours during Corona because I didn't have it to do. And now it's just whenever I have time. Because now I'm a full-time professional coach, I would say. So that's my job. And just like the players need to evolve and try to get better, I also try to get better as a coach. That's also a part on what got me here, is just try to do that 15 minutes a day. It maybe sounds stupid, but if you add it up in 1 month, it's a lot of hours that you're watching or reading basketball. And then obviously also going to clinics in Belgium. I think when I'm in Belgium, now I'm still in Germany, but when I'm back in Belgium, I try to watch as many clinics as I can, because I think even if it's a traditional coach, I would say, you can steal a small-sided game, or you can tweak it a little bit. Like also from coaches that have a different approach from you can still learn, even if it's a bad thing. Like, okay, they do 5-0. Okay, maybe I would put a defender there because it gets a little bit more representative. There's always something you can take away from. So I think small habits get big results.
That's a good way to say it. Is your notebook digital or is it pen and paper?
It's digital. Pen and paper.
All right, there you go.
Yeah, I can't. I mean, the clinics now, I just go to the clinics and take my paper, but I'm not taking as much notes as I did before. Now it's just like maybe one small set game or a quote or something he says. So it's not a lot, and I just take a note of it on the paper, and then I put it on my
transfer. Got it.
my PC.
Makes sense. All right, let me ask you this. I want to wrap up with 2-part question. So part one, when you look ahead over the next year or two, what do you see as being your biggest challenge? And I know one of those is going to be getting yourself a full-time coaching job. So your biggest challenge, and then after you answer that part, second part of the question is, when you think about what you get to do coaching basketball, what brings you the most joy? So your biggest challenge and then your biggest joy.
Biggest challenge, I would say, in Belgium you have a rule that I'm a sport teacher and I had a certain amount of hours, so I can go back to my old job for 5 years. So now I've already done 2. So I would say my biggest challenge would be to get an environment or to figure out if I really want to do the coaching job for my whole life or not within the next 3 years. That would be the biggest challenge. I think that's the stuff. And then my biggest joy I have, I think the relationship with the players itself. Also, in my opinion, you need to have. It's also maybe a little bit more because I was a play development coach this year. Because then your relationship is different with the players than you're, for example, a head coach. Yeah, as a head coach, you need to decide about minutes, about who's starting, who gets subbed first, who plays in money time. So that's a little bit different. But I would say now the biggest thing I enjoyed was my relationship with the players I had off the court. That's the thing. I think, for example, the thing is also, if you have a really good relationship off the court, it gets easier to translate it on the court. That's also what I recognize, for example, with the pros, because I only saw them one time a week, and they're pros. They will do what I say I do, but it's still different than, for example, guys where I was head coaching under 18, and 4 of those guys were always there. And when you drive here in Germany for 3 hours to a game and you drive 3 hours back, I mean, you build a relationship because you're sitting in the car for 6 hours. So it's maybe a little bit weird to say, but the car rides were, I wouldn't say they were enjoyable because it's 3 hours of driving, but that was a fun thing that we developed. Also the trips this year to Varese and Berlin with the under 17 were really nice. Like, on court you do your stuff and they need to do their stuff, but off the court, the fun, or the dinners we had, and the joking around, or like the swimming, I think that's the biggest thing. I think for me, the relationships with the players you build up.
Yeah, that's good stuff. All right, before we finish, I want to give you a chance to share, how can people reach out to you, find out more about what you're doing, offer you a coaching job? How can they do that? Give them your social media, email, whatever you want to share. And then after you do that, I'll jump back in and wrap things up.
Cool. I think the easiest way to reach me is just on Twitter. It's just Jonas De Bruyne. Jonas is Jonas, and then De Bruyne, my last name is DeBruyne. And then my email address is also just my first name, last name, 09 at hotmail.com. Those are the things I think are the useful. And then on Instagram, I'm also Jonas De Bruyne. I'm not the guy with a special nickname or something like that. It's just my first name and my last name.
Keep it simple.
Yeah.
Keep it simple. Keep it simple.
So you can reach out to one of those channels. That's great.
Awesome. So, Jonas, cannot thank you enough for taking the time out of your schedule today to jump on and join us. It's a lot of fun getting to know more about you and learning more about the CLA and differentiated learning. And I think there was a lot of great conversation that we were able to have. So thank you. And to everyone out there, thanks for listening. And we will catch you on our next episode. Thanks. Your first impression is everything when applying for a new coaching job. A professional coaching portfolio is the tool that highlights your coaching achievements and philosophies, and most of all, helps separate you and your abilities from the other applicants. The Coaching Portfolio Guide is an instructional membership-based website that helps you develop a personalized portfolio. Each section of the Portfolio Guide provides detailed instructions on how to organize your portfolio in a professional manner. The guide also provides sample documents for each section of your portfolio that you can copy, modify, and add to your personal portfolio. As a Hoopheads Pod listener, you can get your Coaching Portfolio Guide for just $25. Visit coachingportfolioguide.com/hoopheads to learn more.
Thanks for listening to the Hoop Heads podcast, presented by Head Start Basketball.